Okay, good evening. I think I thought maybe wise to do one more shir of Hilchos Shabbos where we are by in the chapter of electrical appliances. And as of next week, we should be having two more shirim as far as I can tell. Next week will still be the end of Adar. And the week after will be the very beginning of Nisan. So two more shirim, and then we'll go off for a short vacation of maybe 3 weeks or so due to Pesach. So I thought maybe it would be wise to do one more shir on Shabbos today and two shirim next week and the week after, Pesach issues. Learn a little bit about Pesach, although 2 hours and all of Hilchos Pesach is impossible, but as much as to get it as much as we can to prepare for Pesach. If that's something you would like. If not, we can continue Shabbos, those two stream as well. Whatever you think, whatever you ladies prefer, that's what we'll do. But in the meantime, this week, we'll still dedicate to Hilchos Shabbos. And I'd like to also dedicate the shir tonight and tomorrow, Kaf Adar, the 20th of Adar, is the Yortzeit of Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who I'm very much close to him, used to be close to him and now to his Torah, and learn a lot from his ways. So, Lilu Nishmat, or Lichvod Nishmat of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, we'll dedicate our Torah learning. It's 26 years since he passed away. 26 is actually the gematria of Yud Kei Vav Kei. Shem Havaya is 26. So yes, it's something special. But really his Torah is tremendous and very user-friendly, if I could say it that way. You know, that his Torah is very friendly to society, to normal life, and not too stringent. Very balanced, and he was also a unique person from the point of view of his midot, of his attributes. He was a very good-hearted, smiley person, and loved every Jew, no matter what type of hashkafa he had. And he also was very knowledgeable in the other areas of the world, of the outer world, if it's sciences, if it's history, he always made sure to understand the situation from the physical point of view in order to reach a proper and correct halachic decision. So he's really a role model for myself and maybe for many others. And I remember being at his levaya. There was a 300,000 levaya, 300,000 people actually participated. It's huge. And all of Yerushalayim, were the streets of Yerushalayim from his neighborhood in Shari Chesed all the way to Har HaMenuchot were packed, rivers and rivers of people. And big loss. Someone just told me today that Rav Neventzal Shlita should live to 120 and be well. He's now almost turning 86 years old. He was one of the closest students of Reb Shlomo Zalman. He used to be a chavrusa of his for quite a few, 25 years. He used to learn together chavrusa on a daily basis. So someone just told me today that when Reb Shlomo Zalman passed away, Rav Neventzal, of course, tore his shirt like you would for chas v'chalila for close relatives. But besides that, someone told me today, it's something very unique. He sat Shiva 7 days because it was such a close rabbi of his that he felt it's almost like a parent. And he sat Shiva, which is something very remarkable and rarely done. So I wasn't that fortunate to be close enough to sit Shiva over Shlomo Zalman, but it's definitely a Very, very difficult loss. Mizrat Hashem, we should be seeing the Mashiach soon, and then Chiyat Meitim, we'll see everyone back with us. Okay, so as we said, we're continuing Shabbos chapter. We're up to the fourth discussion, fourth issue here, which deals with, this is something quite common nowadays. It could be either in very high buildings where there's need for a masheva, like a pump, to pump up water to the higher floors, that they should have water in their faucets. So there's an electric pump that pumps up the water. Or sometimes people have basements. And in the basements, when they use the toilet, so the pipe that leads everything out has to go above ground. So there needs to be also a pump there to pump it up above ground and send it to wherever it needs to be sent. So when you're using water, this is just opening the faucet. Normally using water on Shabbat in high buildings where there are those electric pumps create the water flow. When you're using the faucet, you may be activating the electric pump. And that means you're involved in a melacha. It's not just a regular apartment, small 4 or 5 story apartment building or private homes where the water easily gets to all the floors just by gravity, and there's no need for an electric pump. And all you do is you open the faucet, so there's a mechanical barrier that opens and allows the water to flow in. So that's allowed, of course, on Shabbat because it's all mechanical. But in this case, it's electric, and electricity turning on and off is not allowed. And flushing the toilet in the basement could lead to an electric pump to start working. So it's definitely best in these cases to connect the electric pump to what's called Pikud Shabbat, the Machon Tzomet that deal with all these electrical appliances and all these modern technology gadgets. They deal with them halachically, and they have all these different techniques to connect to these different gadgets to make them allowed to be used on Shabbat. How do they work? It used to be that they used to use the idea of grama, meaning indirect. When you did something, my father used to, when he was a practicing physician in the hospital, so he used to be called in sometimes for a case to come in and take care of a patient. So he had a gramophone, it was called, or a Shabbos phone. The idea was, I still remember it till today, he doesn't own it anymore. He's no longer a practicing physician in the hospital. He just does kupat cholim once in a while. But I remember that type of phone. It used to have the, that cord, like there used to be in the old type phones, and used to lift up the handset, and it still rang twice. After he lifted up the handset, it still rang twice, and then suddenly connected, and he was able to talk. Which means that it's not the moment that you lift up the handset, it starts connecting and talk, and you can talk. That would be a direct electronic action involved with electricity, which would not be allowed. Even though we're talking about safek pikuach nefesh, because he was called in a serious, only if there's a serious situation. But it doesn't mean there was life and death. He was a pediatric neurologist, or is a pediatric neurologist, which doesn't mean necessarily life and death issues. So he couldn't rely on pikuach nefesh, safek pikuach nefesh, to lift up the regular phone and immediately talk. So he had Tzomet. He purchased this Shabbos phone from Tzomet, which allowed him to lift up the receiver sorry, the receiver, right? The receiver in order to talk because it continued ringing for at least two more times until it connected. So it wasn't a direct melacha, it was indirect, and for medical purposes, that was allowed. We can't use the phone just to schmooze to one another and use the Shabbos phone. That's, of course, not allowed. Because after all, grama is still an issa d'Rabbanan. So although we're talking about a double d'Rabbanan now, because electricity in general, as we explained last week and 2 weeks ago, electricity in general, according to most poskim, is only rabbinically forbidden, unless it's a filament wire, which makes it d'oraita, but here in the phone, there isn't. So it's d'Rabbanan, plus grama makes it double d'Rabbanan. Double d'Rabbanan we allow l'tzorach gadol, for a great need. So just schmoozing on the phone with a friend on Shabbat, that's not a great need, although maybe sometimes people feel the urge and need to talk to someone. so for them, it's a great need. But usually, it's just small talk. Is pleasure, but not much more than pleasure. So that cannot be done even with a Shabbos phone, of course. But for a physician, to answer the phone when there's a case that needs his consultation, he can answer the phone in that way. That's a gramophone. So same with this situation of water in the faucet or flushing down in the toilet, where there may be a electric pump activated when you open the water, shut it or close it or flush down the toilet. So to use a grama Shabbos gadget from Tzomet makes it much more lenient because, again, we're double d'Rabbanan now. There is this delay that doesn't allow the pump to start immediately when you open the faucet or flush the toilet. And then, so it's grama, and the electricity in general in these cases is only rabbinic, so it's double d'Rabbanan. And of course, it's tzorach gadol. This is a great need. Everyone needs to wash their hands, to wash their face on Shabbat. Wash dishes sometimes. And flush down the toilet, of course, is a great need. So this way makes it much more permissible. But what happens in a case, before we get to that, there's another technique that Tzomet more recently has been starting to use in all their techno-halachic gadgets. They started using another technique, which is shinui zerem. What does that mean? Shinui zerem means that if something is already on and it's working slightly, and you want to now strengthen the electricity in a way that makes it work more, that's from slightly working to working more advanced and more strong. That's something that's barely rabbinically forbidden, barely. Because what's the idea behind it? We said that using electricity in general on Shabbat, turning on, turning off, has to do with nolad or molid, that something new occurs, that it starts working, so that's rabbinically forbidden. That's the whole concept behind not being allowed to turn on something electric. Now that it's already working just slightly, and you're just strengthening the work of that appliance, so you're not creating something new. It's not nolad. It's just more advanced, just working stronger. So that's barely rabbinically forbidden. What is the only problem with that? It's no longer nolad. So what's the problem? Why should that not be allowed totally? The answer is ziluta de shabta. Ziluta de shabta means we're sort of desecrating the holiness of the Shabbat. We're using the Shabbat like a weekday. We're making the atmosphere of Shabbat like a weekday because we're strengthening electricity and making something work harder, work stronger. So it's just ziluta de shabta. Now, So what Summit does, now their more recent technique of doing these electrolytic solutions is that they have all their appliances work very, very slightly at all times during the entire Shabbat. And when you press a button or a pedal or something, it works stronger only. But it's not that it's not that you have to turn on the device. So for example, they have these electronic wheelchairs for people who are handicapped, can't walk. So they need to get around on Shabbat as well. So their idea is that they have this electric wheelchair, which at all times works very, very, very slightly. It's always on, but very slightly. You barely see it moving. Without pressing on the pedal, it won't really move, but it's on. And when the person presses on the pedal, then it goes stronger, gives it more electricity, and then it starts moving. So that's a way to solve the issue of nolad. It wasn't turned on Shabbat, rather just strengthened. And therefore, it's allowed for handicapped people. Again, not for a regular walking person. They can't use anything of this sort because, again, we're talking about ziluta de Shabta. After all, it's violating the atmosphere of Shabbat, which is rabbinically forbidden, but a very slight rabbinic prohibition, plus the fact that it's all electricity, which is anyway rabbinic. So again, it's a double derabanan, which is allowed in great need. So a handicapped person is in great need. He can use this type of wheelchair. A regular walking person cannot use it. That's how Summit works these days with all their different types of electrical appliances that are technologically fit for use on Shabbat. By the way, very important in these cases where people are using because they're allowed to, all these electronic devices that are technologically done by Summit, it's very wise, it's very important to have a sign up somewhere, pasted on the appliance you're using, that it's a Summit Bishut Summit prepared for Shabbat or something like that. Bikud Shabbat Bishut Summit. How come? Because otherwise it's Maritain. Imagine a person driving on this electric wheelchair, riding on it on Shabbat. It seems like he's violating the Shabbat. The moment there's a sign, Bikud Shabbat Bishut Summit, so we all know that it's specially engineered for Shabbat. It's important to have that sign. I once told a soldier we had in Olari, I had this question once. We'll probably get to this discussion later on in the book. But it's also a very common case where people must go to the army on Shabbat. They're called in for a mission or something on Shabbat. So of course, we don't go in on Shabbat just because we have to clean the base. If that's the reason they're calling us in, then don't go. And it's not going to be a seruv pkudai. You won't be put in jail because after Shabbat, you'll explain to the officer, and if he doesn't understand himself, so you call in the chaplain, the military rabbi of the unit, and he'll explain it to him that we cannot drive into the army on Shabbat just to clean up our rooms or the base. That's definitely we don't do. But if we're called in, if a soldier is called in on Shabbat in order to go out for a mission, then of course he drives the car. He goes driving, no question. But I once told a soldier that best if you have some type of sign that shows that you're on a military mission. You're driving towards a military mission. You could have a sign, write a sign before Shabbat, have a permanent sign to stick to the car or to have hanging from the window or something that says Pilut Mivtzait. Pilut Mivtzait means I'm on a military mission. And then people know you're not driving the car stop because you want to go to the beach. If you're dressed like a soldier with a uniform. You have a kippah on, that itself proves to everyone where you're going. You're on your way to a military mission. So it's always good to make people realize that you're not just violating Shabbat, it's something necessary. Okay, anyhow, back to these pumps, electric pumps in high-rise buildings or in basements, bathrooms and basements where they need the pump to get the stuff out and away. So the best, as I said before, if it's your private home, best to call in an engineer from Tzomet and have him fix it in a way that it has this electric Shabbos mode that doesn't allow the activation of the pump, electric pump, immediately as you flush the toilet. It has this grama or shinui zeren. Both ways work. That it either delays the pump from working immediately, or the pump is always on. The electricity is always working. It's just when you flush the toilet, it goes stronger. So if you have one of these two techniques, you're allowed to use the toilet in such places. If not, some people have asked me that they've built a home, and unfortunately, they didn't think of this ahead of time, or they bought a used home, a second-hand home, and it doesn't have this Tzomet gadget that makes it permissible to use on Shabbat. What should they do till they call the technician, until they come in and fix it for them? What should they do this coming Shabbat? So the best way is to pull down, either not to use that toilet, that's the best, but if you must use that toilet, then you flush with your elbow, you push down the lever with your elbow, which is b'shinui, and then you're doing again a double derabanan. That's like shinui zerem or gram of tzomet. One is shinui, the second is electricity in general, and it's a great need, so you're allowed to do it that way. Here, especially, it's called kvod habriot. It's to respect human beings. Otherwise, it's so embarrassing that you won't be able to live without doing so. So Chazal allowed even one derabanan b'kvod habriot. When it's a situation of terrible embarrassment, Chazal even allowed one derabanan to be transgressed in order to save yourself from such a disgrace. So even if it weren't two derabanan, it may have been allowed. But better yet, if you flush with your elbow, you do it b'shinui, so you get the trei derabanan, and therefore it's allowed until you get the tzomet person to come and fix the whole thing, and then you just flush it normally because it's anyway double derabanan. The grama or the shinui zerem plus the fact that electricity is derabanan. Now, what do you do in high buildings where there's sometimes this need for a pump to get the water up to the highest floors? And if you're on one of those higher floors and you just open the faucet to use water, you may be activating the pump, electrical pump. So again, if there's tzomet, that's the best. But here, it's even more lenient because A, you have no idea by using the faucet or flushing the toilet, whatever it may be, you have no idea would that activate the pump at that moment or not. Maybe there's enough water that was already pumped up before you use the water, and the water won't come up soon. Maybe it's still full. The capacity that can hold in the water is full, and you may not be activating anything when you use the water. Maybe yes, maybe not. You don't know. So if not, then it could be grama. It could be that indirectly later on it's going to turn out to be too empty, and then it's going to activate the pump. You don't know. So that's called safek psik reisha. We're not sure if it will happen immediately or not. And also, when it's a whole big building, so many people are using the water at once. This one's using, that one's using. So maybe anyway on. The pump may be anyway on when you use the water because it's pumping because of other people are using the water. And if it's anyway on, and even if it increases the electricity, the pumping, what we said, from something that's on to increase, that's no longer nolad. And here you can't say so much on zilut the Shabbat because no one sees it. So after all, both Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Ovadia Yosef, Ashkenazim and Sfardim, both allowed using in these high scraper buildings, they allowed using the water, even though there's a pump involved, without even the tzomet gadget, because of these leniencies. But of course, best is to get the tzomet gadget so that there should be no issue. But if let's say you're at a hotel, and little do you know, you don't even know, that in the hotel, that's how the water functions, that they have this water pump, the electric water pump that circulates water to all the floors. So due to the fact that, again, it may not be activated immediately because there's enough water in the reservoir right now for your needs. And it may be that it's already working because other people are using the water and it's already working now. So there's so many leniencies, and it's all an issue of electricity only, not anything d'oraita to begin with. It's only rabbinic. And it's not zilut the Shabbat because no one sees anything working. No one hears the pump. No one sees the pump. So it doesn't create a non-Shabbostic environment, atmosphere. You don't feel anything. So it's much, much more lenient, and you can use the water freely. Not the hot water. Don't forget, the hot water is a whole other issue. We spoke about it when we studied Bishul, the whole issue of letting in cold water into the dude, which is boiling hot because of the electrical dude working, especially in the hotels. They always have to have hot water. So they're using the electric dude boiler all the time. So when you use the hot water, you're allowing more water into the system, cold water into the system, and cooking the new cold water in the dude with the boiling hot water, which is terribly wrong. That's an issur d'oraita of bishul. You're cooking. So definitely you cannot use hot water in the hotel. Definitely not. Only cold water. Same as we use in our homes. Most of us only cold water. Only a person who has circulating boiling water without any new entrance of new water, only they can use hot water on Shabbat. For hands, face, and washing dishes, not for the whole body, not to shower. But most of us don't have such a dude that only takes out water and doesn't allow new water to come in. So for most of us, we cannot use the hot water on Shabbat, period. So same is true in hotels. Do not touch the hot water at all during the entire Shabbat. But the cold water can be used freely, even if there's an electric pump that pumps up the water because of the reasons we gave before. I assume if it's a religious hotel, Jewish religious hotel, they most probably have the Tzomet or some other institution that deals with these issues, and they probably organize it so that there is no issue at all. Okay. Now a little bit about the Sha'on Shabbat on Shabbat. The timer, we have the Shabbos timer. We have these small clocks that connect to the socket, and we connect then the electrical appliance to that timer, and then it works on and off during the Shabbat according to the hours we set it before Shabbat. Yeah, the Sha'on Shabbat. Could be for the plata, it could be for the air conditioning, both heat, cold, any type of electrical appliance that's connected to a Sha'on Shabbat. How do we do with it on Shabbat? So, firstly, there's a concept that everyone agrees to, and that is that you can always prolong the current situation. If it's now on and it's about to shut off in half an hour, you can push the pegs up or down, whichever way they go, in order to make it continue for another hour instead of half an hour. To continue the situation is allowed according to all poskim. Although they tell you not to get used to doing it every single Shabbat, just when you really need to, because again, it looks like you're valuing Shabbat, Zilut the Shabbat, all that, but it's really allowed if you have even not a great need, even if it's a slight need, allowed. Same is true if you would like to prolong the off situation. Let's say it's off now, and it's supposed to turn on in 2 hours. And you don't want it to turn on at all till the end of Shabbat. Or to turn on in 3 hours instead of 2 hours, then you can press the pegs, push the pegs into the situation where you'd like that it should continue being off for a longer time. So always to prolong a situation, whether from on to on or off to off, is allowed. To continue being on or continue being off is allowed. Now comes Shlomo Zalman and adds another very, very amazing chiddush, which most people don't know. And it's very important to know this because it's a leniency, and it's a good leniency. Very helpful one. And that is what happens in the following situation. Well, we said, before I get to this point, the opposite, to make something turn off earlier than it should, while it's now on. Let's say it's on and it's supposed to be on for another hour, and you want it to work only for half an hour. You mustn't touch the pegs to get it to turn off earlier than it should, because then you're doing gram kibui. You're doing indirect, although it's not going to shut off immediately, but indirect shutting off of electricity is also prohibited on Shabbat, unless it's a great need, but usually it's not. So you cannot do that. Or the opposite. You want it to turn on earlier than when it's meant to turn on. It's meant to turn on in 2 hours. You want to turn on in an hour. You cannot do that either, because you're changing the situation. You're not prolonging it. You're changing it. That's not allowed. That's dealing with electricity on Shabbat, even though it's grama. It's not immediate, but it's still rabbinically forbidden. Again, unless it's a great need, then you would be allowed to. Usually it isn't. Now, what happens in the next what would happen in the next situation? Let's say it's now off. Okay, the plata is off on a timer, and it's supposed to turn on in 2 hours. After it turns on, it's supposed to stay on for 5 hours and then turn off again. Let's say that's the way you've set it up. Let's say now you realize that you don't need it on for 5 hours. It's way too much. You just need 2 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours. Can you now, when it's off, it's in an off situation now. Again, it's meant to turn on in 2 hours for 5 hours. Can you now lower the time by moving the pegs that it should stay on just for 2 hours instead of 5 hours when it gets turned on eventually? So what's going on now? On one hand, you're dealing with an opposite situation that it will be once it gets turned on. When it gets turned on, it's going to be on. Now you want to touch it, the pegs in a way, fill around with the pegs in a way that will make it turn off from an on situation before it was meant to turn off. So lichor, it should be prohibited. You should not be allowed to do so, because we said you're not allowed to change the situation from on to off earlier than it should be. But says Shlomo Zalman, since it's off right now, and true, it's meant to turn on, and it will turn on in 2 hours for 5 hours. But if you want to make it turn off earlier than it should, to be turned and to be on only for 4 hours or 3 hours, you are allowed to rearrange the pegs now from off, when it's off now, to turning off earlier than it was scheduled to begin with. You're allowed to do so. How come? Because right now it's off. And you're now also making it turn off earlier than it should have. So it's from off to off, which is allowed. That's his idea. The moment it's from off to off, it's allowed. Even though in between, it's going to turn on. And you've now scheduled to work less than it should have to begin with. It's still allowed because it's from off to off. And same idea, he says, is from on to on. Let's say now the plata is on. In an hour, it's supposed to shut off for 3 hours. and then turn on again. And you suddenly realize that you needed to turn on earlier than it's scheduled to. So we said the moment it turns off, you cannot make it turn on earlier because you're changing the situation from off to on. You're not allowed to do that. But now that it's on, even though it's going to turn off, but now that it's on, you can make it turn on earlier than it was scheduled to because it's from on to on. We don't care that in between, it's going to turn off also. So if it's going to turn off in an hour and stay off for 3 hours, you can make it stay off for 2 hours and make it turn on within 2 hours after it gets turned off.
Sorry, what about if you have a break in the middle? Let's say you realized at lunchtime that it's on now, it's going to go off, and then for dinner, you put it a little bit too late, you want to get it earlier.
Oh, that's what I just spoke about right now.
So that's fine having a break in the middle as well, where it goes off.
Correct. That's what I just said now. As long as you caught it on time before it went off. It's now on, and you want it to turn on earlier than it was scheduled, even though in between, it will turn off. That's allowed. You're allowed to make it turn on earlier while it's on now. When it's on now, you're allowed to make it turn on earlier. That's a very big chiddush of Shlomo Zalman, huge leniency. Most people don't know this, and it's very useful. You can really use this in real life and not be transgressing any sin of Shabbat. Okay, so that's for the issues of prolonging, changing the timers on Shabbat. That would be around it. Okay, now for the next situation. Yeah, this is also tremendous chiddush. This is mostly based on Rav Vosner. Rav Vosner of the Shevet HaLevi, who was a rabbi in Bnei Brak, passed away just a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, quite recently. Big posek. He wrote thousands of responses in books called Shevet HaLevi. So actually, he's mostly stringent. Very we wouldn't expect so. Let's put it that way, that he would be lenient on such a case. It comes up a lot that either in our home or outdoors, all kinds of, I think there are lasers that make these things work, that when you walk by, a light gets turned on, a bulb of a LED. Say people have in their homes the alarm system. So when you go into a certain room and the alarm system is on, then a light turns on because it's called galai nefach. It detected that something or someone came into the room. By the volume of the emptiness of the room, it detects that someone came in. So an LED bulb, like a red or green or whatever bulb, gets turned on the moment you enter the room. Are we allowed to enter the room on Shabbat, knowing that this may happen? So there are Shabbos modes that you set the timer again on a timer before Shabbat that allows you to activate the whole alarm system only certain hours of the day or night. And then you can arrange the hours in a way that you're not walking in the house when the timer is on or when the alarm system is on, so that you will not activate or deactivate these bulbs walking in and out of a room. So that's the best way to do it. Or if you can't do that from a timer point of view, you can cover the detectors. You cover them with some type of, a towel or a tape or whatever, and then it won't do anything because it's blocked. So it doesn't have the eye to notice that you've walked in, so it won't turn on or turn off these bulbs. So definitely that's a better way to work at these systems so that these lights don't turn on and off. But here comes the leniency. Says Rav Osner, it's backed by other rabbis as well. He says something amazing. He says, the truth of the matter is, all you're doing here is walking. You haven't done any action to turn on that light. You didn't flick a light switch. You didn't press any button. You just walked in the room. Says Rav Osner, walking leisurely, normally, is not an action that's a melacha. When the Torah says, lo ta'aseh kol melacha, there has to be something some action you did that created the melacha. Pushing a button, turning a knob, cutting something, cooking. All these are actions, special actions that create the melacha. But just to walk, that's not a melacha. So it may be activating something, but without doing a melacha. Just walking. And therefore, says Rav Osner, that's not a violation of Shabbat. Shabbat the violation of Shabbat is not due to the mere fact that something got activated. It has to be by an action. And we did an action to activate something. Lo ta'aseh kol melacha. Don't do something that creates a melacha. Here we didn't do anything. We just walked. So therefore, he says it's not a real problem. It's not a real issue. Better, everyone holds. Better yet, if you cover it, or if you have it on a timer that it doesn't get activated, that's better. But if you didn't do so before Shabbat, you forgot, or whatever, or you're another person, or you're invited to someone else's home, and they didn't do so, you're allowed to walk as much as you'd like, in and out of the room. We don't care at all if those bulbs turn on and off as you're walking in and out. It's not a malacha. Not even something greater than that. Imagine walking in the street, Shabbat, taking a nice walk, Shabbos night, meaning Friday night, which is not really Friday night because it's late Shabbat. Friday has ended at Shkia. So you're walking after the meal of Shabbat meal in the night, in the evening, and as you're walking in the street, a light gets turned on. Could be a light from a person's private home. As you're walking by the electronic eye or laser detects you and it turns on a light. It could be the light, a street light. Some streets have it very in the savings way. They save electricity. So the electricity is off most of the night, but when someone walks into the street, the street lights get turned on. So save their riyas some money. So what happens then? Are we doing something wrong by walking in those streets? If we know ahead of time, if we don't know and it happens, then we're a noose where we can't help it. We didn't know it's going to happen. But if we know this is the street or this is the sidewalk, we walk by, a light is going to turn on. Should we be walking all around so we don't go through the electric eye or laser, whatever it is, and get and have the light turn on? Says Rav Osner, again, it's not a problem. It's not an issue. Because all we're doing is walking. There's no action involved to turn on that light. It gets turned on its own. We have no contact with that. No action that created it. Rav Phil Malka in the book compares this to something really outlandish. If this wasn't right, if this wasn't true that we're allowed to walk in such places, even though things get turned on as we're walking, then we couldn't have left our homes at all during the entire Shabbat. Nowhere. Why? Because up in the outer space, there are lavyanim. How do we say those in English? Satellites. Satellites that are always taking pictures of what's going on here on Earth. When you walk out, it's going to take a picture of you. So are you not allowed to walk out of the house? because you're not really active. This case is even more lenient, actually. When I come to think of it, I'm not sure it's a good example because the satellites are constantly taking pictures, no matter if you're there or not. Just if you happen to walk out, then your image will be on the picture, but you're not activating anything. That's like, to the Kotel. You go to the Kotel on Shabbat, you're filmed all the time. For security purposes, they have these cameras that are filming everything. But since they're always on, no matter if you're in the picture or not, the camera is working. So you haven't done anything that activated anything. It's always on. That's even more lenient. And you're definitely allowed to walk through these cameras.
So what about like automatic doors? Because you're just walking through an automatic door. Sometimes in like hospitals or hotels, they have doors that are electric. And I remember, especially in the UK, they don't have any Shabbat modes or anything, especially in some of the hospitals. But as soon as you go next to them, they open up.
Right. And there's no manual door from the side that you can walk in manually. It's all electronic.
Some places you've got to be lucky. I remember visiting, visiting someone. We went all the way around the building trying to find the manual door. I think sometimes, yeah.
Sometimes you can't, sometimes you can't.
But is it the same concept?
Oh, so I'll explain one more point, and then you'll see that it's not exactly the same. Although there is definitely a big rabbi. This is not Rav Wosner, a different rabbi. I'll get to him in a moment, who allowed going through such doors on Shabbat. It's Rav Rabinovich. The Tzal passed away quite recently, a year or two ago. The Rosh Yeshiva of Ma'ale Domim, Hezder Yeshiva, Rabinovich. Rabinowitz. We'll still get to his opinion, but firstly, I'll explain why it's a little different. Because Rav Wosner himself, who is the founder of this chiddush, of this leniency, he himself said that the moment you're benefiting from walking through these places and turning on lights and so on and so forth, if you're benefiting from it, then he feels that it's not meant to be done on Shabbat. He couldn't find a clear prohibition, because you're right, Juliet, it's the exact same concept. You're just walking. There's no malacha. Then what does it matter if it's through electronic doors or by a light that gets turned on or a bulb with a LED that from a alarm system? It's all the same. You're just walking. But Rav Wosner felt that if a person does this in order to help himself out, he needs the action. He needs the opening of the doors or the light to turn on. Then it's improper on Shabbat. He couldn't find the reason, but I think the reason may be because, again, it goes back to the Ziluta de Shabta issue. It's obviously not a Shabbosdik atmosphere that things get turned on as you walk by. So if you're just walking by and you don't really need the light or need the door to open, and it opens automatically, then it's not at all your issue. It's okay. Even if you know it's going to happen, it's not by mistake. On purpose. You walk by, it's allowed. It's allowed. But let's say people have sometimes, if I recall by Leah, when we used to have the treat of coming over for the shir by Leah's home. So if I recall correctly, when I used to walk by the house and walk towards the door, lights turned on the way to enable us to walk up the stairs easily and see where we're going. So many homes have that their private homes have lights that go on as you walk by in order to help you see where you're walking. That's exactly, he says, Rav Wosner, he speaks exactly about that. He says that should not be turned, should not be on Shabbat. You must deactivate those lights before Shabbat. Even though it's the exact same difference, you're walking by and it just gets turned on as you're walking, but still, since you're the one that actually installed those lights and you like that they turn on for your benefit in order to see where you're walking, so that's improper. That's improper. I believe it's like the idea of Zilut de Shabbat. So to your question.
Can I interrupt to ask a question? Sorry, Rabbi.
Yeah, one tiny sec. I'll just finish with this point here. So to your question, Juliet, to walk through an electronic door, that's definitely for your benefit because you can't get in otherwise, or it's much more convenient to get in that way. So for your benefit, it's not the proper thing to do, even though you're just walking. And therefore, it wasn't said you should not use these type of things on Shabbat. You would have to wait for a non-Jew. You can't even wait. You can't even go in when a Chiloni Jew walks in because he did the wrong thing. You can't benefit from a Jew who sinned on Shabbat. You can't benefit from it. But if a non-Jew walks in, they're doing it for their own benefit. And any malacha that's done by a non-Jew for his own benefit, a Jew can benefit from it. So if you see a non-Jew walking in, and you can assume, in Chutz La'aretz especially, you can assume that anyone without a kippah, unless it's a very big nose, then you're sure he's Jewish. No, just joking. But if he doesn't have a kippah on, or a woman who's not dressed Jewishly, so you can assume Rov, there's a great majority in Chutz La'aretz that are non-Jews. So you can assume they're non-Jewish, and therefore you can walk through right after they've walked through. That's how we get into a place where they're all electronic doors. We cannot activate even though we're just walking through. But by the way, walking by the doors, not into the building, walking aside of the building. And as we're walking inside of the building, the door's open, and we're just continuing to walk past, we're not going in, that's not a problem. Because that's, again, the leniency of Rav Wosner, that if you walk by and you're not using it for your benefit, it's okay. Of course, everyone agrees that it's not the best thing to do on Shabbat. You don't have to go look for these things. But if it happens, you have done no isser, no sin whatsoever. Okay, to your question, Laura, yes.
Matthew and I are visiting a cousin of his who is in Bet Levenstein at the moment on Shabbat. Thank God he's recovering. To get into Bet Levenstein on Shabbat, there's like a door that they kind of like. There's like a Shabbos way of getting in, like to the
manual door.
The first door, and then there's like a security thing, and in that security like chamber, there's a thermometer that they like. Often the guards don't notice, and sometimes when we've said, Shomrei Shabbat, they see it because we've taken a different route in.
Right.
But I'm just wondering if they insist, if it's breaking Shabbat for us to. Matthew can pretty much walk past, but I have to hold my arm up because I'm not tall enough for where it's like pushed on the wall. It's measuring a temperature. I'm thinking now that we've got our green, I don't know what they're called, those green passes, that maybe they won't insist on us. Often the guard like waves us through, but on occasion they've told us we have to have our temperature taken. Even though obviously we're wearing masks, and actually the person we're visiting has had corona, and we've been double vaccinated for a while, thank God. But I'm just wondering if they insist, is it better to then just we don't go in? Because it's a shame to not do the visit on one hand, but obviously if it's breaking Shabbat, then it's right.
Then you can't really do it. Yeah, that's it.
I've got another question as well, which is unrelated, but I'm just going to squeeze it in because I can see that time is ending. I just wanted to know, it's completely unrelated. Sorry, everyone else. If there are two yogurts on Shabbat and you want to eat one of them, but the other one will get eaten by another person, are you allowed to like snap open that join that connects them?
Okay. We'll get to that.
All. I'll be quiet now.
Those are the two questions. Fine. So firstly, with the temperature, you mean you have to raise your hand in order for it to get the measure, to get it measured, you have to raise your hand.
I mean, Matthew could walk past, but I couldn't.
Yeah. So you have to raise your hand in order for it to detect your temperature.
Yeah.
To measure.
Yeah.
That's an action already, because you're doing something to make it work. Wow, that's not simple. And it's hard to say that it's pikuach nefesh. It's hard to say that there's really a scare that you've got fever and you maybe bring in corona and you maybe, it's a very, very, very distant situation that may detect something that you shouldn't be. It's mainly for the protocol that you have to do it.
Right, because obviously I could, God forbid, one could have corona and be asymptomatic and go into the hospital. On the other hand,
right.
Like they closed his ward down a few weeks ago because someone was exposed to corona, and then so many people are affected by it. Of course, obviously, Matthew and I would not go if we were even feeling slightly unwell. But
of course,
and we're vaccinated now. But
yeah, for the protocol, they want it to be done. Wow, that's a tough one. That's a tough one, because I'll say one thing: if one is a patient in the hospital or rehabilitation center, as a patient, we don't get involved as to what they do to us, the physicians, that if it's necessary or not on Shabbat. Like if they have to take our temperature every 3 hours, even though we feel that it's extra and not necessary, we do it anyhow. Because there's a protocol in the hospital that must be met, because otherwise, later on, if something goes wrong, they'll have to prove that everything was done properly. So we go along with what they ask us to do, because that's part of the treatment. But here, the problem is you're coming from the outside. You're totally healthy. You're just coming to visit. And they're asking you to do something that's not really necessary. And you're doing an action to activate the thermometer to measure your temperature. You know what? I'll take this question bli neder before Shabbat, if you're planning on visiting this coming Shabbat. So before Shabbat, I'll try to send an email to the group with the answer to this question. It's a good question. Right now, I can't think of a good enough leniency to allow you, but I'll have to ask. I'll speak with my father, discuss with my father. He's an expert in medicine and halacha. That's exactly up his alleyway. So I'll see what he thinks. I'll get back to you on that. Regarding the yogurts, so disconnecting, no matter if someone is going to eat the other one or not, it's definitely not borer. It's not the problem separating, because they're separate as is. Everyone can identify the two separate yogurts. That's not the issue of borer. It's not an issue of separating one from the other. And it's the same mean. It's the same exact food. So for the same exact food, there's no issue of borer either. So that's not the issue here. The issue could be two. One is mechatech, and the other is mochek. How does that work? Mechatech means that when there's when you cut anything into even sizes, you cut something in even sizes, that's mechatech. You're making sure that it's all the same size. In this case, that's what you're doing, because when you're breaking them one from another, then you're splitting it in half, having equal sizes of yogurt, and separate one from the other now. So that could be mechatech. But Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach allowed it. Rabbi Yosef didn't. He said you mustn't do it on Shabbat. If you want to do it before Shabbat. But Rabbi Shlomo Zalman allowed it from the point of view of mechatech. How come? He came up with a very, very amazing understanding. Mechatech is when you are interested to cut things a certain size. Here, it's the company that made them a certain size. All you're doing now is separating one from the other just because it's more convenient to eat it that way, or more convenient to have two people eat from it. But you don't care what the size is. You don't care if it's 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters, or 4.5 by 4.5, or 3 by 3. You don't care. It's not that you're looking for this exact measurement, this exact size to break from the other side. So therefore, there's no issue of mechatech here. The other possible problem would be mochek. If there are letters that run across the two yogurts, letters run across, or even just a picture that is mutual to both yogurts at once, when you break the two in half, splitting them in half into two, you're actually erasing the picture or erasing the letters. And that's not allowed because of mochek. So true, there's a leniency here also that some posting speak about, that it wasn't ever meant to be connected forever. It was meant to be broken in half, and therefore was never to begin with a real picture. But that's much more difficult to allow. Sfardim allow it. Rabbi Yosef allowed even that. And Ashkenazim, Shomazam, and others did not allow it. So if you have letters running across, or a picture that's mutual to both sides, you cannot tear it open, cut it in half, split it into two. You have to eat from the actual connected yogurt, and then the other person would eat from the other one, and you don't disconnect them. But if there's no picture, if it's just shapes or colors, that's not considered erasing. But if it's an actual picture or words, then you cannot disconnect the two. Okay, otherwise you can.
Thank you.
Very welcome. So, Blined, I'll get back to you about the thermometer with the temperature measuring before Shabbat. Okay, so take care. Have a Shabbat Shalom. And as I said, next week, unless you tell me otherwise, we'll spend 2 weeks on Pesach. And if not, if you think you prefer continuing Shabbos, we'll continue Shabbos. Whatever you women prefer.
I feel like it was just yesterday that you were telling us about Pesach last year.
Yeah, last year. That's true. It's true. Time flies. Time flies. Unbelievable.
That's
very
crazy.
True. Very true. I know.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so whatever you feel. Let's. Okay, very welcome. If I'm here otherwise, I'll do Shabbos. If not, we're going to Pesach. Okay.
Thank
very
you very
welcome.
much.
Good
Shabbat
evening.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.